Hello everyone and welcome back to Monsters of the Mind. As always, I'm your host, Mr.G. So, you know giants, right? Tall humanoids, some can be as tall as mountains, bigger than any human who's ever lived. Yeah, those guys. Well, today I've got a special treat for you. Today we're talking about two giants that come from European stories, and those giants' names are Gogmagog and Gargantua. Gogmagog is a combination of the biblical characters Gog and Magog, both of whom were also said to be giants. He was an individual, he was pretty malevolent, he lived in the UK, and he comes from English folklore. Gogmagog is described as being 12 cubits tall. Like I said in an earlier video, I'm not good with math, so I have no idea how tall that's supposed to be. If any of you know how to measure in cubits, I would love to know. He was also described as being pretty ugly. Now, this picture isn't a good example, but this is the best placeholder picture I could find, so bear with me. Gogmagog's story is pretty short. Basically, it tells about how when early settlers came to Wales, Gogmagog and his army of giants attacked them, slaughtering many of the settlers, but then the settlers managed to kill all the giants except for Gogmagog, who challenged a man named Cornelius to a wrestling match, where he broke 3 of his ribs. This angered Cornelius so much he went into an adrenaline rage and chucked Gogmagog right off a cliff, killing the giant. The end. Yeah, pretty short, but like I said, it's a short story. Meanwhile, Gargantua means giant. He was also an individual. He was pretty neutral, since he was just kind of like a guy who did whatever he wanted, and yeah. He comes from France, and he comes from the series called Gargantua and Pentagrule, which is a series of books. Now, Gargantua is interesting, because instead of coming from a single book like most of the literary monsters in this series, he actually comes from a quintology of books. In this summary, I'll be talking about the second book, called Gargantua, which is basically his origin story. Anyway, Gargantua was absolutely ginormous. When he was just a baby, he was so big he needed to be fed the milk from over 1,700 cows, and when he grew up, he was so tall that humans could get stuck between his teeth. Now, the story of Gargantua is pretty straightforward, in that it doesn't have an overarching plot is instead about describing Gargantua's life from birth till, well, not death, since this is a prequel to another book, Gargantua is just fine in that one. Anyways, it talks about his birth, the time he went to Paris and stole their bells, the time he warded off a bunch of intruders by getting cannonballs stuck in his hair and then combing them out on top of the soldiers, and the time he ate a bunch of people who were stuck in his salad. You know, things like that. Gargantua first appeared in the first book of the series, called Pentagrule, which is about his son. In the story, Gargantua ends up going to Fairyland, leaving his son in charge of things. Now, there's plenty of other stories about giants out there. Like in Greek mythology, giants were creatures that attacked Olympus, but they managed to get defeated by the gods with help from Heracles. According to the Bible, giants got wiped out by Noah's flood, but evidently there were a few survivors. Like, there's the story of David and Goliath, which tells a story about how a young man named David managed to kill a giant named Goliath using just a slingshot. And of course, there's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, but I think we all know that story. As you can see, giants are a very reoccurring figure in mythology, since it seems like every culture that's had mythology or folklore has stories about giant humanoids. It's actually kind of crazy and makes me wonder how so many people came up with the same idea. Anyway, here's Vincent. In my world, giants, because they take too much space on the ground, they live up in the sky. They have the unique ability to walk on clouds like they were solid matter, which is interesting, to say the least. They grow giant food, too. Like, have you seen their watermelons? Those things are like the size of a T-Rex. As for the two giants that Mr. G is talking about, Gogmagog is still dead because no one's bothered to revive him yet. Instead, they placed up a memorial statue for him. The reason no one's revived him yet is because no one ever found his body. As for Gargantua, I don't really know. His family is kind of an enigma to me. Okay, now let's look at the cards. According to this, 12 cubics is 13 feet tall. Is that true? Like I said, I don't know how to measure in cubics, so someone please help me. Anyway, this card is mostly fine, in that I can't really find any errors here. Yeah, I give this card a 10 out of 10. Except maybe the 13 feet tall thing, because like I said, I don't know how to measure in cubics. Gargantua is also pretty good, although it does make a few errors. It claims he had his son Pentagrel when he was 524 years old, but he was only in his 400s when he had his son. Yes, giants live that long in that novel. But that's the only real error here, so I give this card a 9 out of 10. Although this card genuinely kind of grosses me out a bit. I mean, he's drooling, he's covered in food. This card's kind of making me nauseous. Moving on. Now, even though giants themselves are very reoccurring in pop culture, these two, I was not able to find pop culture appearances for them. So, yeah. That's all for this episode of Monsters of the Mind. Join us next time when we talk about the Great White Whale. Bye! Meanwhile... Mr. Jim, I didn't know you could talk.
Well, that's not all I can do. You see, Eric, I know all about you. I've heard of you and your exploits, and all your friends. And I know a way that you can truly be cool.
You know a way to make me cool? How?
I can give you power equal or greater to that of Vincent's. You just need to follow my instructions.
Oh, really? You can give me power just like Vincent? Oh man, that sounds awesome. Okay, just tell me what to do.